The grey concrete of the overpass was cold enough to seep through 3 layers of cardboard and the thin, moth-eaten wool of Arthur's coat, settling deep into his bones like a permanent frost. It was a Tuesday, or perhaps a Wednesday. The days had long ago lost their distinct names, bleeding into a continuous loop of survival and endurance. The city above him rumbled with the heavy, rhythmic thrum of morning traffic, tires singing on wet asphalt, the sound of a world moving with purpose and velocity while he remained static, a forgotten statue in the underbelly of the metropolis. Arthur shifted, his joints popping with the dry sound of snapping twigs, and pushed himself up to a sitting position, his breath plumed in the frigid air, a momentary ghost of life before vanishing into the gloom. He rubbed his face, the bristles of his unkempt grey beard scratching against his calloused palms. Once those hands had signed multi-million-dollar contracts and held crystal tumblers of aged scotch. Now they were perpetually stained with the grime of the streets, cracked from the cold and trembling slightly from a hunger that had become a constant nagging companion. He did not dwell on the past often. It was a dangerous place to visit, filled with sharp edges and the suffocating weight of betrayal. But the cold mornings always made the memories sharper. He remembered the warmth of heated floors, the smell of freshly ground coffee, the silence of a room that was quiet by design, not by abandonment. He shook his head, physically dislodging the phantom sensations of his old life, and focused on the immediate reality. He needed to move, or the cold would claim him before the sun fully rose. Arthur gathered his meager belongings, a plastic bag containing a half-empty bottle of water, a few crumpled newspapers for insulation, and a singular, treasured photograph wrapped in layers of cellophane that he never looked at but couldn't bear to discard. He stepped out from the shadow of the bridge and into the biting wind of the city streets. The district was waking up. Shopkeepers were rolling up metal shutters with a cacophony of clatters. Delivery trucks were idling at curbs, and the early commuters were rushing toward the subway stations, their eyes fixed on phones or the pavement, programmed to ignore the spectral figures like Arthur, who drifted at the periphery of their vision. He was invisible. It was a superpower he hadn't asked for, but had mastered perfectly. He could stand on a busy corner for hours, and eyes would slide over him as if he were part of the brickwork. It was better this way. Acknowledgement usually brought scorn or pity, and he had no use for either. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a winter 2 years ago when he had slipped on black ice, heading toward the park, where the public restrooms sometimes offered a reprieve from the wind and, if he was lucky, warm water to wash the grit from his face. The hunger in his stomach was a dull ache today, manageable unlike the sharp, twisting pain of yesterday. He scanned the trash bins as he walked, a reflex born of necessity, checking for discarded bagels or half-eaten sandwiches wrapped in foil. He found nothing but wet receipts and empty coffee cups, the dregs of latte foam drying on the lids. As he neared the financial district, the architecture changed. The grimy brick gave way to towering spires of glass and steel, reflections of the grey sky distorting on their polished surfaces. This used to be his arena. He knew the layout of these streets better than the lines on his own hand. He knew which cafes served the best espresso, which corner offices had the best view of the harbour, and exactly how ruthless the people inside those towers could be. He kept his head down, the brim of his soiled beanie pulled low. The wind channeled through the canyon of skyscrapers, accelerating into a gale that whipped his coat around his legs. It was in this wind tunnel, amidst the rushing suits and the blaring taxi horns, that he heard a sound that didn't belong. It was a small sound, fragile and terrified, cutting through the mechanical noise of the city, like a bird hitting a window pane. It was a sob, not the angry, drunken weeping he often heard in the alleyways at night, but the pure, unadulterated distress of a child. Arthur stopped. The flow of pedestrians parted around him like a river around a stone, grumbling and sidestepping his stationary form. He listened, turning his head slowly. He heard it again. Tucked into the recessed doorway of a high-end jewelry store, sheltered slightly by a marble pillar, was a splash of bright yellow in the monochromatic grey of the street. It was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7. She was wearing a yellow raincoat and matching rain boots, looking like a lost duckling in a storm of wolves. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, and her face was buried in her arms. People were streaming past her, dozens of them every minute, yet no one stopped. They glanced, registered the anomaly, and then accelerated, their faces tightening with the "not my problem" mask that city dwellers wore like armor. Arthur felt the old instinct, the urge to keep moving, to preserve his own limited energy for his own survival. Getting involved meant attention. Attention meant police. Police meant displacement. But then the girl lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears, her nose red from the cold, and her eyes were wide with a terror so absolute it punched a hole through Arthur's hardened exterior. She looked at the sea of legs rushing past her, searching for a face she knew and finding only indifference. Arthur sighed, a sound that rattled in his chest. He couldn't leave her. He looked at his dirty hands, his tattered sleeves. He knew he looked like a monster to a child raised in comfort. He had to be careful. He shuffled closer, stopping a respectful distance away, about 10 feet, giving her space. He crouched down, his knees protesting loudly, trying to bring himself to her eye level so he wouldn't loom over her. The girl saw him and shrank back against the cold glass of the display window, her eyes widening further. She didn't scream. She was too scared for that. She just froze like a prey animal spotting a predator. Arthur raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing he held nothing. "It's okay," he rasped. His voice was rough from disuse, gravelly and deep. He cleared his throat and tried again, softening the tone. "I'm not going to hurt you. You look like you're a long way from home." The girl stared at him, trembling. She gripped the hem of her yellow coat so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't speak. Arthur glanced around, hoping to see a frantic parent running toward them, but the street remained an endless conveyor belt of strangers. "My name is Arthur," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "It's a cold morning for sitting on the ground. The stone steals your heat fast." The girl sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. The fear was winning, but the desperation was making her listen. I can't find my mommy," she whispered. Her voice was tiny, barely audible over the traffic. "I can see that," Arthur said gently. "Did you get separated? Maybe on the subway? Or in a store?" She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "The crowd, they pushed, and then I couldn't see her coat. She has a blue coat. I ran to find her, but she wasn't there. And I ran more, and now I don't know where the buildings are." Panic. The blind panic of a child who realizes the world is vast and they are small. Arthur knew that feeling well, though his panic was a slow burn compared to hers. "Okay," he said. "That happens. Crowds are tricky things, but you did a smart thing stopping here. Staying put is good." He looked at her shivering shoulders. She was dressed for rain, but not for this biting wind that cut through layers. He hesitated. He was wearing everything he owned, but she was tiny. Slowly, moving with deliberate, telegraphed motions, he reached into his deep pocket and pulled out a pair of woolen gloves. They were mismatched, one navy blue, one dark grey, and frayed at the cuffs, but they were dry. "Your hands look cold," he said, placing the gloves on the pavement halfway between them. He pulled his hand back quickly. "You can put those on if you want. They aren't pretty, but they're warm." The girl looked at the gloves, then at Arthur's face. She seemed to be assessing him, looking past the dirt on his skin to the eyes underneath. Somewhere in her upbringing, she had probably been told never to talk to strangers, especially strangers who looked like him. But cold and fear are powerful motivators, and Arthur's eyes, despite the weariness, held a kindness that was hard to fake. She reached out tentatively, snatched the gloves, and pulled them on. They were massive on her small hands, making her look like a cartoon character. But she instantly tucked her hands under her arms, preserving the warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," Arthur said. He stayed crouched, his legs beginning to burn. "Do you know your address or maybe your mom's phone number?" She shook her head frantically. It's in my backpack, but Mommy has my backpack. She was holding it because it was heavy." Of course, no phone, no ID, no money. Just a lost child in a yellow coat. Arthur scanned the street again. He saw a police cruiser 2 blocks down, stuck in the gridlock. That was the logical move. Flag them down, hand her over, walk away. But something stopped him. The police in this precinct were overworked and often aggressive with the homeless. If Arthur approached a cruiser, dragging a crying rich girl, they might tackle him before he got a word out. He couldn't risk an arrest. Not with his record, even if it was from a lifetime ago. And he didn't want to scare her more by bringing uniformed giants with guns into the equation just yet. "Okay," Arthur said. "Here is what we are going to do. We need to get you out of this wind. There is a hotel lobby about 2 blocks from here. It's warm and they have security guards who can help call your mum. But we have to walk there. Can you walk?" The girl looked at her boots. She nodded. Arthur stood up, groaning as his knees cracked. He held out a hand, then paused, looking at his blackened fingernails. He withdrew the hand, and instead offered the sleeve of his coat. "You can hold onto my sleeve," he said, "like a handle. That way we don't get separated like you did with your mum. I won't walk fast." The girl hesitated for a second, then stood up. She reached out and gripped the cuff of his tattered coat with the oversized, mismatched gloves. The contact sent a strange jolt through Arthur, a connection to another human being that wasn't based on conflict or transaction. It was trust, a fragile, terrifying trust. They began to walk. The contrast was stark and jarring. The tall, shambling figure of the homeless man in his monochromatic rags, and the small, bright yellow figure of the girl attached to his side. People stared now. The invisibility shield was broken. He saw the looks of suspicion, the furrowed brows of businessmen wondering if they should intervene. He kept his head high, projecting an air of purpose. "I am protecting her," his posture said. "Don't you dare question me." "What is your name?" Arthur asked as they waited for a crosswalk signal. He stood between her and the curb, a human shield against the taxis that cornered too sharply. "Lily," she said, looking up at him. The fear was receding slightly, replaced by a child's curiosity. "Do you live outside, Arthur?" The question was innocent, devoid of judgment, yet it stung. "I do right now," he answered honestly. "It's a bit like camping, but without the marshmallows." Lily managed a small, watery smile. "I like marshmallows. I like the burnt ones." "Me too," Arthur smiled, the skin around his eyes crinkling. "The burnt ones have the most flavor. People who like the white ones don't know what they're missing." They crossed the street. The wind picked up, blowing a stray newspaper against Arthur's leg. He kicked it away. He felt a fierce protectiveness rising in his chest. It had been years since he had cared for anything other than his own survival. He had forgotten how it felt to be responsible for something fragile. It was a heavy weight, but it made him feel human again. It made him feel like he existed. "I'm hungry," Lily announced, the adrenaline of the initial panic wearing off and leaving room for bodily needs. Arthur's hand went to his pocket. He had half a granola bar he had been saving for dinner. It was stale and rock hard, but it was food. He hesitated. If he gave it to her, he wouldn't eat until, well, he didn't know when. He looked down at her. She was looking at a bakery window they were passing, eyeing the pastries. "I don't have a croissant," Arthur said apologetically, "but I have a granola bar. It's a bit crunchy, but it's okay." He unwrapped the foil carefully and handed it to her. She took it without hesitation and took a small bite. "It's hard," she noted, chewing diligently. "Builds character," Arthur deadpanned. She giggled. It was a wonderful sound, a splash of color in the gray morning. They continued walking. The hotel was in sight now, the Grand Obsidian. It was a fortress of luxury, a place Arthur had once stayed in during business trips a decade ago. He knew the doormen would not let him in. They would see his coat and smell the streets on him and block the door. He would have to explain from the sidewalk. He would have to convince them he wasn't begging, that he was returning a lost princess. As they walked, Lily's grip on his sleeve tightened. "Arthur." "Yeah?" "My daddy says I shouldn't talk to people I don't know. He says some people are bad." Arthur nodded solemnly. "Your daddy is a smart man. He's right. You have to be very careful." "But you're not bad," she said definitively. Arthur swallowed a lump in his throat. "I try not to be, Lily, I try. You gave me your gloves. Bad people don't give away their gloves." The logic was flawless in its simplicity. Arthur looked down at her small hand, clutching his dirty coat. He felt a sudden, sharp pain of regret for the years he had lost, for the life that had been stolen from him. He wondered who her father was, this man who taught her caution, but raised a child with enough heart to see past the grime. He must be a good man, Arthur thought, a protective man. They reached the corner just before the hotel. The wind died down for a moment, and the sun broke through the heavy clouds, illuminating the street. Lily stopped. "My shoe is untied," she said, pointing to her yellow rain boot. "Okay," Arthur said, "let me get that." He knelt down on the sidewalk, ignoring the stares of a couple walking their poodle. He fumbled with the laces, his fingers clumsy in the cold without the gloves he had given her. He tied a double knot, ensuring it wouldn't come undone again. As he straightened up, his eyes caught the small charm dangling from the zipper of her backpack, which he hadn't noticed before because she had been on his right side. It was a custom zipper pull, silver and heavy. It wasn't just a design. It was a logo, a stylized hawk gripping a globe. Arthur froze. His breath hitched in his throat. He knew that logo. He knew it better than he knew his own face in the mirror. It was the corporate crest of Harrow Dynamics. He looked at the backpack itself. Embroidered in small, tasteful thread near the top handle was a name, L. Harrow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the traffic faded into a dull roar, like blood rushing in his ears. Arthur stared at the name, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Harrow. Marcus Harrow, the man who had been his partner, the man who had been his brother in everything but blood. The man who had cooked the books, framed Arthur for embezzlement, destroyed his reputation, stripped him of his assets, and cast him out into the street while he took the helm of the company they had built together. Arthur looked up from the backpack to the girl's face. Lily, not just Lily, Lily Harrow. She was Marcus's daughter. She was the child of the monster who had ruined his life. Arthur pulled back as if burned. He stood up abruptly, stumbling slightly. The kindness in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a shock of cold recognition and a sudden rising tide of bile. He looked at the girl, really looked at her now. He could see it, the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. She looked like Marcus. She looked like the man who had laughed while the security guards escorted Arthur out of the building 5 years ago. "Arthur," Lily asked, sensing the shift. She took a step toward him, reaching for his sleeve again. "What's wrong?" Arthur stepped back. His instinct screamed at him to run, to turn around and vanish into the alleys. Why should he help her? Her father sat in a golden tower built on the bones of Arthur's life. Her father slept in silk sheets, while Arthur slept on concrete. This girl was the beneficiary of his destruction. Every thread of her expensive yellow coat was bought with money that should have been his. "Don't," Arthur muttered, his voice trembling not with cold, but with rage. "Arthur?" Her voice trembled. She held out the mismatched gloves. "Did I do something bad?" He looked at the gloves, his gloves, on the hands of a Harrow. The irony was suffocating. He was keeping the daughter of his enemy warm while he froze. The universe was playing a cruel, twisted joke on him. He could leave her here. She was close to the hotel. Someone else would find her. The police would come. She would be fine. She was a Harrow. The world bent over backwards to keep people like her safe. He owed her nothing. He owed her father less than nothing. He turned away, looking down the street. The path to the alley was open. He could disappear. He could go back to being a ghost. He could let Marcus Harrow feel a fraction of the panic Arthur had felt every day for 5 years. But then he heard the sniffle, the quiet, trying to be brave sound of a child who thinks she has just lost her only safety line. Arthur closed his eyes. He saw Marcus's smug face in the boardroom. But then he saw Lily's face when she offered him the burnt marshmallow smile. He stood on the precipice of a decision. The bitter wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. The child waited, confusion clouding her eyes, unaware that her last name was a curse that had haunted the man standing before her for half a decade. Arthur stared at the pavement, the grey stone blurring as a wave of dizziness washed over him. The name Harrow echoed in his mind, bouncing off the walls of his skull like a ricocheting bullet. It wasn't just a name, it was a scar. It was the signature on the termination papers, the headline in the business journals that painted Arthur as incompetent and corrupt, the logo on the building he was escorted out of, while the staff he had hired watched in silence. Marcus Harrow had not just taken his company, he had taken his narrative, rewriting Arthur's life story from that of a visionary founder to a cautionary tale of corporate malfeasance. And now the universe, with its twisted sense of humor, had placed Marcus's most precious asset in Arthur's trembling, dirt-stained hands. The urge to walk away was physical, a tightening in his calves, a shifting of his weight. Why should he save the daughter of the man who had condemned him to freeze? Let Marcus feel the cold. Let Marcus know what it was like to be helpless, to lose something you couldn't replace. The dark thought tasted like copper in his mouth, bitter and metallic. He took a step back, the distance between him and the child widening to a chasm. "Arthur!" Lily's voice was barely a whisper now, cracking under the weight of his sudden withdrawal. She took a step toward him, her small boots splashing in a shallow puddle. She didn't understand. How could she? To her, he wasn't the disgraced former CEO of a tech giant. He was just the man with the warm gloves and the funny jokes about marshmallows. She held out a hand, reaching for the safety he had promised. Arthur looked at that hand. He looked at the oversized navy blue glove, his glove, swallowing her fingers. He remembered the day he bought those gloves 3 years ago, with money he had made collecting cans for a week. They were his only defense against the frostbite that threatened to take his fingers every January. He had given them to her without a second thought. Because she was a child, because she was cold. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was not Marcus. She was just Lily. She carried his blood, yes, but she did not carry his sins. If Arthur walked away now, if he left a 7-year-old girl alone on a street corner, in a city that ate the weak for breakfast, he wouldn't be balancing the scales of justice. He would just be becoming the monster Marcus had always accused him of being. He would be proving his enemy right. He let out a ragged breath, the steam hissing through his teeth. The anger didn't vanish. It sat heavy in his gut, a cold stone of resentment. But he pushed it down, burying it under layers of necessity. He closed his eyes for a brief second, composing himself, summoning the remnants of the man he used to be, the man who solved problems, the man who led. When he opened his eyes again, the hardness was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. "I'm here, Lily," he said, his voice rougher than before, stripped of the playful tone he had used earlier. "I'm not going anywhere. I got dizzy for a second. Old men get dizzy sometimes." "Are you sick?" she asked, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. "No," Arthur lied. "Just hungry. Come on, we're close to the hotel. Let's get you inside." He didn't offer his sleeve this time. He felt a need to maintain a physical boundary, a way to protect himself from the proximity of the Harrow name. But Lily, oblivious to his internal war, stepped up and grabbed his coat cuff again, anchoring herself to him. The contact burned him, but he didn't pull away. They resumed their walk, but the dynamic had shifted. Arthur moved with a grim determination now, his eyes scanning the street not for threats, but for the most efficient path to be rid of this responsibility. He wanted this over. He wanted to hand her off to a uniformed doorman and disappear back into the anonymity of the shadows before Marcus Harrow could arrive. He didn't want to see the man. He didn't think he could stomach the sight of him without doing something he would regret. The Grand Obsidian loomed ahead, a monolith of black glass and gold trim that screamed opulence. It was the kind of place that had a signature scent pumped into the lobby, a mix of white tea and money. Arthur knew it well. He remembered staying in the penthouse suite during the merger talks 10 years ago. He remembered the thread count of the sheets and the way the concierge knew his drink order before he asked. Now, as he approached the revolving brass doors, he saw the reflection of the pair of them. A tiny girl in bright yellow and a tall, stooped scarecrow of a man in layers of grey filth. It was a grotesque juxtaposition. A doorman stood outside, a giant of a man in a long coat with gold epaulets and a top hat. He was scanning the driveway for arriving limousines, his posture rigid. As Arthur and Lily approached, the doorman's gaze landed on them. His expression shifted instantly from professional neutrality to defensive hostility. He stepped forward, blocking the path to the entrance, his white-gloved hand raised in a stop gesture. "Not here, buddy," the doorman rumbled, his voice a deep baritone meant to intimidate. "Move along. We don't want any trouble, and we definitely don't have any change." Arthur stopped. Lily shrank behind his leg, peeking out at the imposing figure. The old Arthur, the one who lived on the street, would have mumbled an apology and shuffled away. That was the rule of survival. Don't antagonize the gatekeepers. But the current situation, the adrenaline, the anger at Marcus, the injustice of it all, ignited a spark in Arthur's chest. He straightened his spine, he pulled his shoulders back, ignoring the pop of his stiff joints, and lifted his chin. For a moment, the grime on his face seemed to matter less than the steel in his eyes. He looked at the doorman not as a beggar looks at a benefactor, but as a boss looks at a subordinate. "I am not asking for change," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, but it possessed a clarity and diction that caught the doorman off guard. It was the voice of the boardroom, the voice that used to silence a table of 20 executives. "This child is lost. Her name is Lily Harrow. She is separated from her parents. You are going to let us into the vestibule out of the wind, and you are going to call the police and her father immediately." The doorman blinked. He looked at Arthur's tattered clothes, then at his eyes, and finally at the girl hiding behind him. The name Harrow clearly rang a bell. Marcus Harrow was likely a VIP guest or a known figure in circles that frequented the Grand Obsidian. The doorman's arrogance faltered, replaced by confusion. She's lost?" The doorman stammered, his gaze dropping to Lily. She is scared, she is freezing, and she is the daughter of a very powerful man who will be extremely displeased if he finds out his daughter was left standing on the sidewalk by the staff of this hotel, Arthur snapped. Now open the door. The doorman hesitated for a fraction of a second longer, then stepped aside, ushering them toward the revolving door. Right, yes. Come inside. Just stay in the lobby area, please. I'll get the manager. They entered the hotel. The warmth hit them like a physical wall, thick and scented with floral notes. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers. The floor was polished marble that reflected the chandeliers above. Arthur felt the immediate discomfort of being an intruder. He saw heads turn, guests in tailored suits and designer dresses pausing their conversations to stare at the homeless man standing on the pristine floor. He felt the weight of their judgment, the silent questions. How did he get in? Where is security? He kept his eyes fixed forward, guiding Lily to a velvet bench near the entrance, away from the main traffic flow. Sit here, Arthur said. Lily climbed onto the bench, her legs dangling. She looked around the lobby with wide eyes. It smells nice in here, she whispered. It does, Arthur said. He remained standing. He wouldn't sit. He wasn't a guest. He was a delivery man, and the package had been delivered. The man in the hat is going to call your dad. He'll be here soon. You're staying, right? Lily asked, panic flaring in her eyes again. She reached out and grabbed his hand, his bare, dirty hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb. Arthur looked at the contact. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to run before the sirens started, before the Harrows arrived. But the grip was tight. I'll stay until they know where you are, he conceded. He couldn't leave her alone with the staring strangers. Not yet. The manager arrived within minutes, a woman with a tight bun and a tighter smile that faltered when she saw Arthur. She approached cautiously, as if he were a wild animal that might bite. She focused entirely on Lily, kneeling down. Hello there, sweetie. Are you lost? We're calling the police right now, okay? I want my daddy, Lily said, her voice trembling. We know, we're calling him, the manager soothed. She glanced up at Arthur, her nose wrinkling slightly. Sir, thank you for assisting. You can wait outside now. We can handle it from here. It was a dismissal, a polite way of saying, get your filth out of my lobby. Arthur felt the familiar sting of humiliation. He prepared to nod and leave. He had done his part. But Lily held on. No, she cried out, surprisingly loud. He has to stay. He helped me. He gave me his gloves. The manager looked taken aback. Sweetie, he can't. He stays, Lily insisted, tears welling up again. Arthur stays. Arthur felt a strange lump in his throat. She was defending him. A Harrow was defending him against the world. He looked at the manager. I'll stay by the door, he said quietly. I won't touch anything. I'll just wait until her family comes. The manager sighed, weighing the risk of a scene against the risk of a homeless man in her lobby. Fine, she said tightly. By the door. But if you bother any guests? I know the drill, Arthur said. He gently extricated his hand from Lily's grip. I'll be right there, Lily. Just 10 feet away. I can see you and you can see me. He moved to the side of the entrance, standing near a potted palm, trying to make himself as small as possible. The minutes dragged on like hours. He watched Lily. She sat bravely on the bench, swinging her legs, clutching his gloves to her chest like a security blanket. Every time the revolving door spun, her head would snap up. Arthur's heart raced. He was trapped. He couldn't leave because he had promised her. But every second he stayed increased the likelihood of the confrontation he had been avoiding for years. He rehearsed what he would do. Would he hide his face? Would he turn his back? Or would he look Marcus in the eye and let the man see the wreckage he had caused? 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The police arrived first. 2 officers who strode in, took one look at Arthur, and then moved to the manager and Lily. They asked questions. Arthur watched them check his description. Homeless male, approx 60s, grey beard. He saw the officer glance at him, hand resting near his belt. Arthur held his hands open, palms out, the universal sign of surrender. The officer nodded, a curt acknowledgement that he wasn't a threat, just a nuisance. Then, the chaos arrived. A black SUV screeched to a halt outside, mounting the curb in its haste. The doorman didn't even have time to open the door before a man burst out of the vehicle. He was wearing a dark grey suit, the tie loosened, his hair windswept. He ran through the revolving doors, pushing them so hard they spun violently after him. It was Marcus. He looked older. The last time Arthur had seen him, Marcus's hair was jet black. Now it was peppered with silver at the temples. His face was lined with stress, deep grooves around his mouth that hadn't been there before, but the eyes were the same, sharp, intense, calculating. Right now, though, they were wild with panic. "Lily!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "Daddy!" Lily launched herself off the bench. She ran across the marble floor and collided with her father's legs. Marcus dropped to his knees, heedless of the expensive suit, and wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her small shoulder. A woman ran in behind him, Lily's mother presumably, sobbing, joining the embrace on the floor. It was a tableau of raw, unfiltered relief. The lobby fell silent, the guests watching the emotional reunion with sympathetic smiles. Arthur watched from the shadow of the palm tree. He felt a phantom ache in his chest. He had never had children. He had married the company. He had given his life to the work, and the work had been taken by the man currently crying on the floor. He felt a sudden, intense jealousy, not of the money or the suit or the car, but of that hug, of having someone to lose, of having someone to find. He took a step back, intending to slip out the door while they were distracted. He had seen enough. The girl was safe. The debt to the universe was paid. He reached for the brass handle of the side door. "Wait!" Lily's voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs of the lobby. She pulled back from her father's embrace and pointed a small finger toward the corner. "Arthur, don't go!" Marcus froze. He looked at his daughter, then followed the line of her finger. He slowly stood up, wiping tears from his face. "Arthur?" he repeated, confused. "Who is Arthur?" "The man," Lily said, breathless. "The man who found me. He gave me his gloves. He saved me, Daddy." Marcus turned. His eyes swept the lobby and landed on the figure by the potted palm. Arthur stopped. His hand was on the door handle. He could still run, but his pride, the stubborn remnant of the man he once was, nailed his feet to the floor. He slowly turned his head. Their eyes met across the expanse of the hotel lobby. For a moment, there was no recognition in Marcus's face. He just saw a homeless man, a gaunt, bearded figure in a dirty coat. He saw a charity case. He stepped forward, reaching for his wallet, his expression one of generic gratitude. "Sir," Marcus began, his voice shaking with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. You found her. I want to give you—" He stopped. He was 10 feet away now. He saw the eyes. Arthur didn't speak. He just stared, his expression unreadable, a mix of defiance and exhaustion. He saw the precise moment the coin dropped. He saw Marcus's brow furrow, the squint of confusion, and then the sudden widening shock of realization. The color drained from Marcus's face, leaving him as pale as the marble beneath his feet. His hand, half reaching for his wallet, froze in midair. "Arthur," Marcus whispered. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a ghost story. "Arthur. Penhaligon?" The name hung in the air, a relic from a past life. The manager gasped softly, looking between the billionaire and the tramp. Arthur let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. "Hello, Marcus," he rasped. "You're looking well. The grey suits you." Marcus staggered back half a step, as if he'd been slapped. "My God," he breathed. I heard you were— I didn't know." He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the frayed coat, the worn boots, the dirt ingrained in the skin. The reality of Arthur's fall was laid bare before him, undeniable and horrifying. "You didn't know?" Arthur's voice hardened, the anger finally leaking out. "Or you didn't care to check? It's hard to keep track of old friends when you're busy counting their money, isn't it?" The tension in the room spiked. This was not the heartwarming conclusion the onlookers expected. This was something else, something ancient and ugly. Lily tugged on her father's hand. "Daddy, do you know Arthur?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at the man he had destroyed. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Yes, sweetie," he said, his voice hollow. I used to know him. A long time ago." "He's nice," Lily said, oblivious to the undercurrents. "He likes burnt marshmallows." Arthur's expression softened momentarily as he looked at the girl, but it hardened again as he looked at the father. "She's a good kid, Marcus," Arthur said quietly. "She deserves better than to be lost in the cold. Keep a better eye on her." "Arthur, wait." Marcus stepped forward, his hands trembling. "We need to— I can't just let you walk out like this, not after this." "You let me walk out 5 years ago just fine," Arthur countered, his voice rising slightly, echoing in the cavernous lobby. Security escorted me, remember? You watched from the balcony, you toasted with champagne. That was business, Marcus pleaded, though the excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. You saved my daughter. Arthur, please let me help you. Help me, Arthur scoffed. The bitterness was a poison he had swallowed for too long, and now he was spitting it out. I don't want your help, Marcus. I don't want your money. I just wanted the girl to be safe. Now she is. We're done. He turned to the door again, pushing it open. The cold wind rushed in, biting at his face, welcoming him back to his reality. Arthur, Marcus shouted, moving to follow him. But his wife held his arm, looking terrified and confused. Marcus, what is going on? Who is he? He's the man I told you about, Marcus whispered, his eyes never leaving Arthur's, retreating back. The man who built the company. The man He couldn't finish the sentence. Arthur stepped out onto the sidewalk. The door swung shut behind him, muffling the warmth and the light. He was back in the gray. He took a deep breath of the exhaust-filled air. He was shaking. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. It was over. He had faced the ghost. He had done the right thing. But as he started to walk away, head down against the wind, the hotel doors burst open again. Arthur, stop, please! The shout was desperate, tearing through the ambient noise of the city like a frantic siren. Marcus didn't just call out, he ran. He sprinted down the sidewalk in his Italian leather shoes, ignoring the slush that splattered his pristine suit trousers, ignoring the bewildered looks of the doorman and the passers-by. He caught up to the shambling figure in the grey coat about 20 yards from the hotel entrance, reaching out to grab Arthur's shoulder. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to anchor a ghost before it vanished again, but the moment his hand connected with the damp, filthy wool of Arthur's coat, Arthur spun around with a speed and ferocity that belied his frail appearance. He shrugged off the touch as if it were a physical attack, his eyes blazing with a sudden molten fury that had been suppressed for 5 long, freezing winters. "Don't touch me," Arthur snarled, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He backed up until his heels hit the curb, the traffic whizzing dangerously close behind him. "You lost the right to touch me, to speak to me, or to even look at me the day you signed those papers. Go back to your castle, Marcus. Go back to your warmth. You have what you wanted. You have the company, the money, and now you have your daughter. Leave me the hell alone." Marcus stood there, panting, his chest heaving not just from the exertion, but from the sheer crushing weight of the moment. Up close, in the harsh, natural light of the street, the devastation of Arthur's life was impossible to ignore. The boardroom, with its sanitized distances and filtered air, was gone. Here, Marcus could smell the stale sweat and the metallic tang of the street on the man who had once been his best friend. He saw the grime etched deep into the wrinkles around Arthur's eyes, the cracked lips, the way Arthur's body involuntarily shivered even as he tried to stand tall. It was a mirror reflecting Marcus's own sins back at him, magnified and distorted into a grotesque reality. "I can't," Marcus choked out, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. "I can't just let you walk away, not knowing this. Arthur, look at you, my God, look at you." "Take a good look." Arthur spread his arms wide, the tattered coat flapping like the wings of a dying bird. "This is your handiwork, Marcus. This is the quarterly projection you didn't put in the PowerPoint. Projected outcome for former CEO, total destitution. You did this. You and your lawyers and your fabricated evidence. You stripped me naked and threw me to the wolves so you could sit in the big chair. Well, congratulations. The view must be spectacular." "I didn't think it would come to this," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "I thought you had offshore accounts. I thought you'd moved to the Caymans. I told myself you were fine, that you were just retired. I needed to believe that." "You told yourself a lie to sleep at night," Arthur spat. "I had nothing. You froze my assets, you destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that no one would hire me to sweep floors, let alone consult. I lost the brownstone within 6 months. The car, the friends, they all vanished when the indictments came down. I have been eating out of garbage cans for 3 years, Marcus. I sleep under the I-95 overpass. Last winter, I almost lost 3 toes to frostbite. Does that fit into your narrative of the Cayman Islands?" Marcus went pale, his face draining of blood until he looked like a wax figure. He swayed slightly, the reality of his ruthlessness hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He had played the corporate game, convinced himself that it was just numbers, just strategy. He had dehumanized Arthur to make the betrayal palatable. But now the humanity was staring him in the face, shivering and starving, yet possessing a moral high ground that Marcus could never buy. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, the words sounding pathetic and inadequate in the cold air. "Arthur, I am so sorry." "Sorry doesn't buy soup," Arthur said coldly. He turned to leave again, his energy fading. The adrenaline burst was wearing off, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days, and the stress of the encounter was draining his last reserves. "Wait," a woman's voice joined the fray. It was Elena, Marcus's wife. She had followed them out, holding Lily's hand tightly. She had heard the last part of the exchange, and her face was a mask of horror and confusion. She looked at her husband, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time in years, and then she looked at Arthur. She didn't know the full story. Marcus had likely sanitized the history for her, painting Arthur as a corrupt partner who had to be cut loose. But she saw the truth now. She saw the guilt on her husband's face, and she saw the man who had saved her child. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "I don't know the past. I don't know what happened between you and Marcus, but I know what happened today. You found my daughter. She was lost and she was terrified, and hundreds of people walked right past her. But you stopped, you gave her your gloves." She looked down at Lily's hands, still encased in the oversized, mismatched wool. "You kept her safe. You brought her back to us. That is the only thing that matters to me right now." Arthur looked at Elena. He remembered her from company holiday parties, a kind woman who always asked about his life outside of work. She was innocent in this. "She's a sweet girl, Elena," Arthur said softly. "She didn't deserve to be scared." "And you don't deserve to be out here," Elena said fiercely. She turned to Marcus. "Marcus, fix this. I don't care what you have to do. I don't care what history you have. This man saved our daughter. He is not sleeping on the street tonight. If you let him walk away, I will never forgive you." Marcus looked at his wife, seeing the ultimatum in her eyes. Then he looked down at Lily. The little girl was watching Arthur with wide, teary eyes. She let go of her mother's hand and stepped toward the homeless man. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the half-eaten granola bar Arthur had given her. "You can have it back, Arthur," she whispered, holding it out. "I'm not hungry anymore. You said it builds character." Something inside Arthur shattered. The fortress he had built around his heart, the cynicism he had used to survive the cruelty of the world, crumbled at the sight of that small hand offering him back his own meager charity. His chin trembled. He tried to speak, to make a witty, deflective comment, but nothing came out. A tear, hot and stinging, escaped his eye and tracked a clean line through the dirt on his cheek. He was so tired. He was so incredibly tired of fighting. Marcus saw the crack in the armor. He stepped forward again, slowly, respectfully. "Arthur," he said, his voice steady now, stripped of the panic and the defensiveness. "I can't undo the last 5 years. I can't give you back the time. I know that. I know I am the villain in your story, and I deserve to be, but please let me pay the debt I owe you today, not for the business, but for Lily. Please, just come inside, get warm, get some food, a shower, a bed, just for tonight. If you want to leave in the morning, I won't stop you, I swear." Arthur looked at the hotel entrance. The golden light spilling out looked like heaven. His body screamed at him to say yes. His joints ached, his stomach cramped, and the cold was seeping back into his marrow. But his pride was a stubborn beast. "I don't have money for a room at the Grand Obsidian, Marcus," Arthur murmured, his voice thick. "You're my guest," Marcus said instantly. "Arthur, please, don't punish yourself to punish me. Let me do one decent thing. Let me start to make it right." Arthur looked at Lily. She was still holding out the granola bar. He reached out with a trembling hand and gently closed her fingers over it. "You keep it, kiddo," he rasped. "Save it for later." He looked up at Marcus. The hate was still there, but it was duller now, overshadowed by exhaustion and a strange, dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, this was the universe offering an olive branch wrapped in barbed wire. "One night," Arthur said, his voice barely audible, "I need a shower and a steak, a rare steak." Marcus let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. "Done. Anything you want. Let's go." They walked back toward the hotel. The dynamic was strange, uncomfortable and heavy with unspoken history. The doorman, who had watched the entire scene with his mouth slightly open, scrambled to hold the door open this time, his eyes averting from Arthur's gaze. They entered the lobby again. This time Arthur didn't try to hide. He walked with his head up, flanked by the family of the man who had ruined him. The guests stared, whispers rippling through the room like a breeze through dry grass. "Is that Marcus Harrow? Who is the tramp? What is happening?" Marcus ignored them all. He marched straight to the front desk. "I need the presidential suite," he barked at the clerk. "And I need the house doctor sent up immediately. And room service. Bring a menu. No, bring everything." "Sir, the presidential is currently being prepped for—" the clerk began. "I don't care who it's prepped for." Marcus slammed his hand on the marble counter, a flash of his old ruthlessness surfacing, but this time in defense of Arthur. "Give me the key, now, and get a tailor here. Someone who can measure for a suit within the hour." Arthur stood back, leaning against a pillar. The heat of the lobby was making him light-headed. The smells, coffee, perfume, leather, were overwhelming after years of smelling only decay. He felt detached, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life. Lily came and stood next to him, slipping her small hand into his empty, cold one. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, anchoring him to the earth. They went up in the elevator. The silence was deafening. The mirrored walls reflected the absurdity of the group, the wealthy family in their distressed state, and the homeless man who looked like a prophet from the wilderness. When the doors opened on the penthouse floor, the luxury was almost offensive. Thick carpets, original artwork, a view of the city that stretched to the horizon. It was the world Arthur had been exiled from. "The bathroom is through there," Marcus said, gesturing awkwardly. It has a steam shower. There are robes. I'll have some clothes sent up. Something comfortable while we wait for the tailor." Arthur nodded. He didn't look at Marcus. He walked into the bathroom. It was larger than the space he usually slept in. He turned on the tap, and the water ran hot instantly. He stared at his reflection in the brightly lit mirror. The man looking back was a stranger. Sunken eyes, wild beard, grey skin. He stripped off the layers of filth, the coat, the sweaters, the plastic bags. He stepped into the shower. The sensation of hot water hitting his skin was so intense it was almost painful. He stood there for a long time, watching the grey water swirl down the drain. He scrubbed his skin raw, trying to wash away not just the dirt of the streets, but the shame of the last 5 years. He washed his hair, his beard, his scarred body. When he finally stepped out and wrapped himself in the thick white terrycloth robe, he felt lighter but also more fragile. The dirt had been a kind of armor. Now he was just a clean, broken old man. When he emerged into the living area of the suite, a feast had been laid out. A steak, perfectly seared, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, a bottle of wine, a vintage he recognized. Marcus was sitting in an armchair staring out the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Eleanor and Lily were in the adjoining room. Arthur could hear low murmurs and the TV playing cartoons. Marcus turned as Arthur entered. He looked at Arthur, really looked at him, stripped of the disguise of homelessness. "You look better," Marcus said quietly. Arthur sat down at the table. He picked up the knife and fork. His hands shook, but he managed to cut a piece of meat. He ate slowly, savoring the flavor, the protein flooding his system. He didn't speak until he had eaten half the steak. Then he put the fork down and looked at Marcus. "Why did you do it, Marcus?" Arthur asked. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. "We were partners. We built Harrow Dynamics from a garage. I was the godfather to your first son who died. Why did you frame me?" Marcus took a long drink of his whiskey. He didn't look away this time. He owed Arthur the truth. "Greed," Marcus said, his voice flat, "and fear. We were hemorrhaging money in the Asia division. You wanted to slow down, to be cautious. The board wanted growth. I saw an opportunity to shift the debt, to pin the losses on mismanagement and embezzlement. If I sacrificed you, the stock price would stabilize. I convinced myself it was necessary for the survival of the company. I told myself you were old guard, that you were holding us back. You destroyed my life for stock prices," Arthur summarized, his voice devoid of emotion. "Yes," Marcus admitted. Tears were streaming down his face again, silent and steady. "I sold my soul for the quarterly earnings, and every day since then I have looked at that chair in the boardroom, your chair, and I have hated myself. I became rich, Arthur. I became one of the most powerful men in the city. But I have been rotting from the inside out. When I saw you today, when I saw that you, the man I destroyed, was the one protecting my daughter, it broke me. It killed the lie." Arthur watched him. He saw a man who was wealthy beyond measure, but spiritually bankrupt. He saw the toll the guilt had taken. He realized with a jolt of surprise that he did not envy Marcus. He pitied him. "You can't fix it," Arthur said. "You can't give me the years back." "I know," Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the coffee table. "But I can try to fix the future. I was going to call my lawyers in the morning, but I don't need to wait. I'm going to confess, Arthur. To the board. To the SEC. I kept the files. The real files. I never destroyed them because maybe I wanted to get caught. I'm going to clear your name. Publicly. I'm going to reinstate your shares. With interest. You'll be the majority shareholder again." Arthur stared at him. "You'll go to prison." "Probably," Marcus nodded. "Or at least I'll lose everything. The company, the reputation. But I don't care anymore. I almost lost Lily today. It put things in perspective. I can't look at her and teach her to be good while I'm living a lie. I want to be the man she thinks I am." The room was silent. The wind howled outside the glass, an impotent force against the warmth of the penthouse. Arthur looked at the document, then at the stake, then at Marcus. This was the moment of victory he had dreamed of during the freezing nights. The vindication, the enemy defeated. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like tragedy. "You have a daughter," Arthur said softly. "If you go to prison, who takes care of her? Who walks her to school? Who makes sure she doesn't get lost again?" Marcus slumped. "Eleanor is strong. She'll manage. We have savings that aren't tied to the company." Arthur picked up his wineglass. He swirled the dark red liquid. He thought about the cold. He thought about the invisibility. He thought about the gloves on Lily's hands. He thought about the company he had built. His legacy, now corrupted, but still standing. "I don't want you to go to prison, Marcus," Arthur said. Marcus looked up, stunned. "What?" "Arthur, I framed you. I stole 5 years of your life. And if you go to jail, you leave a little girl without a father," Arthur said. "I know what it's like to be alone. I won't inflict that on her. She saved me today just as much as I saved her. I won't pay her back by taking her dad away." "Then what?" Marcus asked, bewildered. "What do you want?" Arthur leaned forward, his eyes regaining that sharp, intense gleam that had made him a titan of industry years ago. The homeless man was fading. The CEO was waking up. "I want the truth," Arthur said, "but not the prison version. I want you to call a press conference. You will announce that new evidence has come to light exonerating me of all charges. You will say it was an internal accounting error, a systemic failure. Lie if you have to. You're good at it. But you will clear my name completely. You will reinstate my position. Not as CEO, I'm too old for the day-to-day, but as chairman of the board." Marcus listened, his mouth slightly open. And, Arthur continued, his voice hardening, "you will work for me. You will stay on as CEO. You will run the company, but you will run it the way I tell you to. No more cutting corners, no more crushing people. We will use the company's resources to launch a massive initiative for the homeless in this city. Housing, job training, mental health. You will pour millions into it. You will look at the people on the street and you will see me. Every single day. That is your penance, Marcus. You don't get the easy way out of a jail cell. You have to work every day to fix what you broke. Not just my life, but the city we ignored." Marcus stared at him. The proposal was brilliant. It saved the company. It saved Marcus's family. But it put Arthur in total control and forced Marcus into a lifetime of service. It was a punishment that fit the crime perfectly. You would do that?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with hope. "You would work with me, after everything?" "I'm not doing it for you," Arthur said, taking a sip of the wine. "I'm doing it because I'm tired of the cold, and because I have a lot of work to do, and because—" He glanced toward the door where Lily was. "Because I like burnt marshmallows." Marcus put his head in his hands and wept. Not out of guilt this time, but out of relief and a profound, shaking gratitude. Just then, the door to the bedroom opened. Lily walked out, holding a teddy bear. She walked over to the table where Arthur sat in his white robe, looking like a king in exile. "Daddy, why are you crying?" she asked. Marcus wiped his face hastily. "I'm just happy, sweetie. I'm just happy Arthur is here." Lily climbed onto the spare chair next to Arthur. She looked at his clean face, his combed hair. She smiled. "You look different, Arthur. You look like a grandpa." Arthur chuckled, a genuine warm sound. "I feel a bit different, Lily. "Are you staying?" she asked. Arthur looked at Marcus, who was watching him with the eyes of a man who had been given a second chance at life. Then he looked at the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. "Yes, Lily," Arthur said. "I think I'm back." The first night in the king-sized bed was the hardest. Arthur lay awake in the encompassing darkness of the suite, the silence of the room so absolute it rang in his ears like a high-pitched frequency. His body, conditioned to the unforgiving hardness of concrete and the constant subconscious vigilance of the streets, rejected the softness of the mattress. The down pillows felt like they were suffocating him, and the warmth, regulated perfectly by the hotel's climate control, felt artificial and stifling. Around 3 a.m., unable to reconcile the luxury with the muscle memory of survival, Arthur dragged the heavy duvet off the bed and onto the plush carpet near the window. He curled up there, watching the city lights flicker below, a constellation of electricity that he had been exiled from for so long. From this height, the city looked peaceful, organized, a grid of golden arteries. But Arthur knew the truth. He knew that down there, in the shadows between the lights, people were shivering. He knew that old Jack was probably coughing in the doorway of the electronics store on 5th. He knew the canoe, a young runaway he sometimes shared food with, was likely trying to sleep with one eye open near the bus terminal. The guilt of his sudden elevation sat heavy on his chest, heavier than the cold ever had. He wasn't just a man who had won the lottery. He was a survivor who had been pulled onto the lifeboat while watching the others drown. He swore to the silent room that he would not just be a passenger, he would turn the ship around. Morning came with a soft knock on the door. It was Marcus. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he was still wearing the trousers and dress shirt from the night before, though they were rumpled now. He held a garment bag and a cup of steaming coffee. "I didn't know how you took it," Marcus said, placing the coffee on the low table, "so I brought black, sugar, and cream." "Black is fine," Arthur said, standing up from the floor. He saw Marcus notice the empty bed and the duvet on the floor, but the younger man said nothing. The shame was a palpable thing between them, a third entity in the room. "The lawyers are here," Marcus said, his voice tight, "and the tailor, and the PR team. I told them you've been on a spiritual sabbatical and that there was a gross administrative error regarding your departure 5 years ago. We're spinning it as a health crisis that required total isolation. It's thin, but with the amount of money we're about to announce for the new initiative, the press won't dig too deep. They love a redemption arc, provided it comes with a check." Arthur took a sip of the coffee. It was rich, complex, and hot. "A spiritual sabbatical," Arthur mused, a dry smile touching his lips. "I suppose that's one way to describe eating half-eaten bagels out of a dumpster." "Arthur, please," Marcus winced. "Get the tailor in," Arthur commanded, his tone shifting instantly to business. "If I'm going to resurrect from the dead, I need to look the part. And Marcus, get a barber. I want the beard gone, all of it." The next 3 hours were a blur of activity that felt strangely familiar, like putting on an old glove. The barber shaved away the grey, matted mane, revealing the face Arthur hadn't seen in years. He was gaunt, his cheekbones sharper than before, and there were deep lines etched into his forehead that no moisturizer would ever erase. But the jaw was still strong. The eyes were still piercing. When the tailor fitted him into a charcoal wool suit, one of Marcus's that had been hurriedly altered, Arthur stood before the full-length mirror and saw a ghost solidify into a man. He adjusted the tie, his fingers remembering the knot perfectly. He looked like Arthur Penhaligon, CEO. But inside, he was still the man who knew the taste of rain. The meeting with the lawyers was swift and brutal. Marcus sat at the head of the table in the suite's dining room with Arthur to his right. The legal team, a shark tank of high-priced suits, looked bewildered. They had been summoned to manage a crisis they didn't understand. "Mr. Harrow," the lead counsel began, eyeing Arthur suspiciously. "Reinstating Mr. Penhaligon as chairman requires a board vote. There are protocols. The allegations of embezzlement from 5 years ago were false," Marcus interrupted, his voice steady. "Fabricated. By me." The silence in the room was absolute. The lawyers stopped typing. "I am issuing a formal statement retracting all accusations," Marcus continued, reciting the script he and Arthur had agreed upon. "We have discovered archived files that prove Arthur's innocence and implicate a faulty algorithm and my own oversight. We are settling out of court with Mr. Penhaligon for an undisclosed sum, which includes the reinstatement of his majority shareholding status. I will remain as CEO, but I will answer to the chairman. Marcus, the lawyer whispered, pale. You are admitting to fraud. The SEC will see a correction of the record and a stable stock price. Arthur spoke up for the first time. His voice was gravel, deeper than they remembered, resonant with an authority that made the lead counsel sit up straighter. We are not framing this as fraud. We are framing it as an internal audit that revealed a catastrophic system error, which Marcus is now courageously correcting. The narrative is reconciliation, not crime. If you can't sell that, gentlemen, you're fired. The lawyers looked at Arthur, then at Marcus. They saw the resolve. They nodded. They began to type. The press conference was held at noon in the lobby of the Grand Obsidian. It was a circus. The rumor of Arthur Penhaligon's return had leaked, and the cameras were packed tight. When the elevator doors opened and Arthur stepped out, flanked by Marcus and Elena, the flashbulbs were a blinding supernova. He walked through the crowd, the cane he now used, a sleek ebony replacement for his old stick, clicking rhythmically on the marble. He took the podium. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just leaned into the microphone and waited for the silence. 5 years ago, Arthur began, his voice amplified across the room and broadcast to the financial networks. I left Harrow Dynamics under a cloud of suspicion. Today, the sun has broken through. He looked at the cameras, challenging them. I have walked a long road to get back here, a road that most of you drive over without looking down. I have seen the underbelly of this city, the parts that the quarterly reports don't cover. I am back, not just to lead a company, but to change its purpose. He gestured to Marcus. Mr. Harrow and I have resolved our differences. We are united in a new vision. Harrow Dynamics will be launching the Shelter Initiative immediately. We are committing 20% of our annual profits to the construction of permanent supportive housing for the homeless population of this city. We are not building shelters. We are building homes. We are not offering handouts. We are offering jobs. And we are starting today. The room erupted. Questions were shouted. Mr. Penhaligon, where were you? Mr. Harrow, is this a takeover? Arthur ignored them. He looked over the heads of the reporters to the back of the room where Lily was standing with her nanny. She gave him a small wave. He winked at her. That was the only approval he needed. The weeks that followed were a grueling marathon of restructuring. Arthur was a tyrant in the boardroom, but a benevolent one. He slashed executive bonuses and redirected the funds to the initiative. He fired the board members who had been complicit in his ousting and replaced them with community leaders and social workers. He forced the executives to volunteer at the soup kitchens, not for a photo op, but to work. He made them ladle soup. He made them look people in the eye. But Arthur's real work wasn't in the tower. It was on the streets. 1 month after his reinstatement, on a Tuesday that was just as cold as the day he met Lily, Arthur ordered his driver to stop the black town car under the I-95 overpass. The driver, a burly ex-cop, looked nervous. Sir, this isn't a safe area, the driver said. I lived here for 2 years, Mike, Arthur said, opening the door. I know exactly how safe it is. He stepped out. The smell hit him first, urine, damp cardboard, and despair. It was the smell of home. He walked into the shadows, his Italian shoes stepping carefully over broken glass. The camp was waking up. He saw a familiar figure huddled by a fire barrel. Jack? Arthur called out softly. The bundle of rags moved. A bearded face, weather-beaten and scarred, looked up. It took a moment for the recognition to dawn, battling through the cognitive dissonance of seeing Arthur in a three-piece suit. Artie? Old Jack croaked. That you? You look like you robbed a bank. Something like that, Arthur smiled, crouching down. He didn't care about the suit. He sat on a milk crate next to his old friend. I told you I was going to get us out of here, didn't I? Jack laughed, a hacking, wet sound. You said a lot of things, Artie. Mostly about government conspiracies and steak dinners. Well, the steak dinner is waiting, Arthur said. Jack, I have a van coming. It's going to take you to a place called The Haven. It's a building I bought. You have a room. A real room. With a lock on the door and a shower, and no one can kick you out. Jack stared at him, his eyes watering. You serious? Dead serious. And not just you. Everyone here, if they want it. Arthur looked around the camp. Faces were peering out from tents and boxes. People he had shared warmth with, people who had guarded his sleep. We're cleaning this place up, Jack. Not by sweeping you away, but by lifting you up. That afternoon, Arthur watched as the vans arrived. He watched his employees, wearing Harrow Dynamics t-shirts, helping the homeless load their meager belongings. He saw Marcus there, lifting boxes, talking to a woman who had lost her leg to diabetes. Marcus looked tired, but for the first time in years, he didn't look haunted. He caught Arthur's eye across the bustling scene and nodded. It was a nod of respect, of partnership. The debt was being paid, not with money, but with sweat. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable. The media called it the miracle of the private sector, but Arthur knew it was just basic humanity applied at scale. He was tired, though. The energy of the return was fading, replaced by the reality of his age and the toll the streets had taken on his body. He sat in his office, the skyline spread out before him, feeling a familiar ache in his joints. The door opened. It was Lily. She was allowed to bypass all security. It was the one rule Arthur was inflexible about. She walked in, carrying a backpack that looked significantly heavier than usual. She was 8 now, taller, more confident. "Hi, Arthur," she said, climbing onto the sofa. "Hello, Miss Harrow." Arthur swiveled his chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Shouldn't you be in school?" "It's Saturday, Arthur." She rolled her eyes playfully. "And I brought you something." She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a silver thermos and a plastic bag. She set them on the mahogany desk, right on top of the quarterly projections. "What's this?" Arthur asked. "Hot chocolate," she announced. "And marshmallows. I burnt them myself with a kitchen torch. Mommy helped a little." Arthur opened the bag. Inside were charred, gooey marshmallows, black on the outside, gooey on the inside. The smell filled the sterile office with the scent of campfires and childhood. "Perfect," Arthur said, taking one. He ate it, getting sticky sugar on his lip. "Absolutely perfect." Lily watched him eat. "Daddy says you saved the company." "Your daddy did the heavy lifting," Arthur corrected. "I just pointed the ship." "He smiles more now," Lily said. "He used to be grumpy all the time. Now he sings in the car." "That is good to hear," Arthur said gently. "Arthur." Lily hesitated, looking at her shoes. "Are you ever going to go back? To the street?" Arthur froze. He looked at the girl who had found him when he was invisible. He thought about the fear that still sometimes woke him up at night, the fear that this was all a hallucination, and he would wake up freezing under the bridge. "No, Lily," Arthur said firmly. "I'm not going back, but I'm never going to forget where I was, and I'm going to make sure no one else has to be there either." He stood up and walked over to the window. Lily joined him, standing on her tiptoes to see out. Below them, the city was moving, a living organism of millions of stories. Somewhere down there someone was falling, but somewhere else a van was pulling up. A hand was reaching out, a door was opening. Arthur put his hand on Lily's shoulder. The mismatched gloves were framed on his wall now, a reminder of the transaction that had saved 2 lives. "Look at the lights, Lily," Arthur whispered. "They're pretty," she said. "They are," Arthur agreed. "But the spaces between them, that's where the work is. That's where we have to shine." The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the skyline, reflecting off the glass of the Harrow Dynamics Tower. It wasn't the cold, grey light of the morning they had met. It was warm. It was promising. Arthur Penhaligon, the man who had been a ghost, took a deep breath. He was warm. He was fed. He was loved. And for the first time in a long time, he was home. "Come on," Arthur said, turning back to the desk. "Let's finish those marshmallows before the board meeting." Lily giggled, and the sound was the sweetest dividend Arthur had ever earned.